I'm exhausted. I bet you are. I didn't raise my voice when I said it. I didn't need to. Something in the way I finally turned to face my husband made him stop halfway through taking off his watch. For one strange, suspended second, the whole kitchen seemed to hold its breath with me. The overhead light cast a pale glow across the marble island. Rain pressed hard against the windows. Somewhere outside, thunder rolled low and heavy, like the sky itself knew a life was about to split open. Victor gave me that familiar look first. Mild annoyance, polished patience, the expression of a man who had spent 20 years believing he could explain his way out of anything. But then he saw my face, and he took a step back. Balancing books all night is hard work, isn't it, Victor? I asked softly. Especially when you're not balancing them at the office. His expression shifted in tiny, rapid fractures. Confusion, calculation. Then the practiced offense I knew by heart. What is that supposed to mean? For 20 years, I had been the wife people underestimated. The practical one. The woman who kept the house running, fixed what broke, stretched budgets, remembered dates, remembered promises, remembered every small sacrifice that built a family. And for 20 years, Victor had played the polished provider, ambitious, charming, always talking about growth, opportunity, potential. That night, for the first time in our marriage, I watched his confidence crack. It means, I said, rising slowly from the stool, I know about the $60,000 missing from Emily's college fund. The color drained from his face so fast it was almost violent. I slid the account statement across the island. It means his mouth opened, but nothing came out. The screen lit up. A message from Vanessa Shaw. Can't wait for tomorrow night. She still has no idea. I looked, not heartbreak. Not anymore. Recognition. The kind that comes when the person you loved finally drops the last mask. I know, I whispered. About the affair, about the condo, about the money you stole from our daughter to pay for both. Thunder. Victor's lips parted, his voice thinner now, almost frightened. Jackie, I can explain. That was the moment my life changed. Not when I found the phone. Not when I saw the withdrawals. Not even. It changed when I realized the man standing in my kitchen was no longer my husband. And he still thought I was the kind of wife who would quietly forgive him. He was wrong. My name is Jacqueline Landry, though almost everyone in Bracton calls me Jackie. I'm 46 years old, and until a few nights ago, I would have told you my life was ordinary in the most respectable way. Not glamorous, not dramatic, just built piece by piece, year after year, with the kind of quiet effort that doesn't make headlines, but keeps a family standing. I'm a mechanical engineer. For most of my career, I worked for a manufacturing company just outside town, the kind of place where steel dust settles into your sleeves and people respect you only after you've solved problems they thought were impossible. I was never flashy. I was the woman people called when a system failed, when numbers stopped making sense, when something expensive broke and nobody else knew how to fix it. Maybe that's why I missed the cracks in my own marriage for so long. Victor and I met when we were both young enough to confuse ambition with character. I was 24, taking night classes while working full-time, always tired, always determined. He was charming in that easy, polished way that made people turn their heads when he walked into a room. He knew how to talk to people, knew how to make them feel seen, at least at first. We met at a fundraiser one of my coworkers dragged me to. I hadn't wanted to go. I remember standing near a table of dry cheese cubes and warm white wine, wearing a black dress I'd borrowed from a friend because I didn't own anything that looked remotely elegant. Victor walked over with that effortless smile and said, "You look like the only honest person in this room." It was such a strange, sharp thing to say that I laughed. That's a terrible opening line. "And yet," he said, smiling wider, "you're still talking to me." That was Victor. He made everything feel light at the beginning, easy. He listened when I talked about school, about work, about wanting a life that felt stable and earned. He didn't seem intimidated by how hard I worked. He said he admired it. He said I made him want to become more serious, more grounded, more intentional. I believed him. When we got married, I thought we were building something solid. Not perfect, but solid. He worked in finance and consulting, always moving upward, always chasing a bigger office, a better title, more influential clients. I was the one with the steadier rhythm. I made the mortgage payments on time. I tracked the repairs. I handled the small daily details that become the hidden skeleton of a home. We had Emily 3 years into our marriage, and for a while, that little girl seemed to anchor both of us. Victor adored her in the way ambitious men often adore daughters when those daughters are still small enough to be uncomplicated. He bought her toys, lifted her onto his shoulders at summer fairs, called her his bright girl, his future star. And I won't lie, there were good years. Real ones. Years of school recitals and family road trips and late night takeout on the living room floor when both of us were too tired to cook. Years when I truly believed we were a team. Even when Victor became more image conscious, more obsessed with appearances, I told myself it was pressure, stress, the cost of climbing. When Emily got older, Victor started talking constantly about her future, her college, her opportunities. He loved saying things like, "My daughter will never struggle the way we did." It sounded noble, protective, loving. So when we opened the education fund, I let myself feel proud. Every bonus, every tax return, every extra bit of money we could spare, I made sure something went into that account. Emily's future wasn't abstract to me. It had shape. Tuition invoices, dorm deposits, textbooks, a chance to begin adulthood without fear tightening around her throat the way it had around mine. Victor, now I understand he saw it as something else. Available, useful, convertible. But I didn't know that then. What I knew then was that over the last few years, something in him had started to shift. Slowly enough that I kept explaining it away. He stayed later at work, started caring more about how he looked than how he felt, bought cologne that was too young for him, changed shirts before dinners he claimed were casual client meetings, became protective of his phone in that subtle, ugly way that makes your stomach tighten before your mind is ready to name the reason. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. Marriage changes. People get tired. Bodies age. Careers harden people around the edges. But there were moments I still remember with painful clarity now. Victor glancing at his phone during Emily's birthday dinner and smiling at a message he wouldn't show me. Victor coming home after midnight and smelling not like the office, but like expensive perfume mixed with city air. Victor kissing my forehead instead of my mouth. Victor saying, "You worry too much, Jackie," in that soft, dismissive tone that made me feel like I was becoming smaller inside my own life. Then there was his family. His mother had always been polite to my face and vaguely condescending in every other direction. She liked women who dressed well, hosted beautifully, and knew how to make a man feel important. I was never that woman. I was capable, practical, direct, useful, but not ornamental. She respected Victor's ambition. She tolerated me because I made his life easier. At family dinners, I noticed how often his relatives praised appearances over substance, promotions over principles, impressions over intimacy. Victor fit into that world more and more as the years passed. Sometimes I felt him leaning away from me without physically moving at all. And still, I stayed. Not because I was weak, because long marriages teach you to normalize discomfort. You learn how to name distance stress. You name contempt fatigue. You call loneliness routine. You tell yourself every marriage has seasons, and maybe this is just a cold one. I did what women like me often do. I kept things running. I made sure Emily never felt instability. I paid attention. I absorbed. I patched over silence with errands, meals, reminders, schedules. I believed that if I just held the center long enough, the rest of us would come back to it. I didn't know that while I was preserving our family, Victor was already spending it. And the worst part is this. Somewhere deep down, before I ever found the statements, before I ever held that hidden phone in my hand, I think I already knew something was terribly wrong. I just didn't know how expensive the truth would be. Looking back now, the warning signs didn't arrive all at once. They came the way structural failures often begin, in small, almost invisible shifts that seem harmless if you don't understand what they're connected to. I should have understood. After all, I spent most of my life diagnosing systems that were quietly breaking. But marriage isn't a machine. It doesn't come with diagnostic software. The first thing that changed was Victor's schedule. For years, his workdays had been predictable. Long, yes, but predictable. Client dinners maybe twice a month, occasional travel, the usual rhythm of someone climbing the corporate ladder in a mid-sized town. Then suddenly the late nights became constant. I've got investors flying in. We're restructuring some assets. Big opportunity coming up. At first I believed him. Victor worked in finance. Deals happened. Meetings stretched late. But the pattern became strange in ways that started whispering to my instincts. He stopped inviting me to company events. For almost 20 years, spouses were always welcome at the occasional networking dinner or holiday gathering. Then one evening, I asked casually, "Are they doing the winter gala this year?" Victor barely looked up from his laptop. "Yeah." "So, when is it?" He paused just long enough for something uncomfortable to settle in the space between us. "Thursday." I waited. "And you didn't think to mention that?" "It's mostly investors this year," he said quickly. "Not really a spouse thing." The answer felt rehearsed. I remember nodding, pretending it made sense, even though something inside me shifted a few millimeters out of alignment. Then there was the phone. Victor had never been secretive with his devices before. We had lived together too long for that kind of theatrical privacy. Phones were left on counters, chargers plugged into the kitchen wall, messages lighting up without drama. Then suddenly, his phone was always face down, always in his pocket, always silent. One night, while he was in the shower, it buzzed on the dresser beside our bed. I wasn't trying to snoop. That's what I told myself later, at least. But the vibration was loud in the quiet room, and I glanced over without thinking. The notification preview was short. Vanessa. Tomorrow night, same place. Just that. 3 words. My stomach tightened, but I pushed the feeling down instantly. Vanessa was a common name. It could be a client, a colleague, someone from the gym. I turned away before the screen dimmed. When Victor came out of the bathroom, toweling his hair, I asked lightly, "Who's Vanessa?" His reaction was fast. Too fast. "A client." "What kind of client texts you at 11 at night?" He shrugged. "Real estate investor." The answer sounded plausible enough that I felt foolish for even asking, but something inside me kept a quiet record of the moment. Over the next few weeks, the changes multiplied. Victor started going to the gym every morning. Not unusual, except he had never cared about fitness before. Suddenly, he owned expensive running shoes, sleek workout clothes, and protein powders lining the kitchen counter like a small pharmacy. "You're up early," I said one morning as he grabbed his car keys before sunrise. "Trying to get healthier." I nodded, but the words echoed strangely in my mind. Victor had never done anything quietly for himself before. Everything he pursued was visible, strategic, social. Health wasn't a performance, unless someone was watching. Another small shift came from Emily. One evening while we were clearing dishes, she frowned at her phone. "Mom?" "Yeah?" "My tuition account portal is acting weird." My heart jumped. "What do you mean?" "It's probably just a glitch," she said quickly. "The balance looks different than last month." "Different how?" She shrugged. "I don't know. I might be reading it wrong." I forced myself to smile. "Let me check it later." She nodded and went back to her room. But something about the way she had said it lingered with me. That night, after Victor fell asleep, I opened my laptop and logged into the 529 account. At first glance, everything looked normal. Then I saw the withdrawals. Small at first. 5,000, 8,000, 10,000. Each labeled as authorized disbursement, each bearing Victor's digital signature. My chest tightened as I scrolled. 6 months of withdrawals, $60,000. Gone. I stared at the screen for a long time. The house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and Victor's slow breathing beside me. $60,000 from our daughter's college fund, not transferred to tuition, not used for school expenses, withdrawn, moved somewhere else. And suddenly, every strange detail from the past few months snapped into a single, horrifying shape. The secret phone, the early morning gym trips, the late nights. Vanessa. I didn't confront him immediately. Instead, I did what engineers do when something doesn't make sense. I investigated. For the next 3 days, I watched my husband the way a mechanic listens to an engine before deciding what's broken. I tracked the withdrawals. I checked property records. I searched business filings. And on the third night, when Victor fell asleep on the couch with his phone half hidden under a cushion, I finally picked it up. The passcode hadn't changed. It was still Emily's birthday. Inside the phone, I found everything. Text messages, photos, bank transfers, and one particular conversation that made my hands go cold. Vanessa Shaw, Eric Shaw's wife, a real estate investor, someone Victor had clearly been seeing for months. In the messages, they talked about money the way gamblers talk about chips, not as something earned, as something moved, leveraged, converted. One line stood out among the rest. Victor had written, "Jackie will never notice. That account is just dead capital sitting there. Dead capital. Our daughter's education. Our family's future. Reduced to a financial inconvenience." I sat there in the dark living room, staring at that message, while Victor snored softly 10 feet away. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. My husband hadn't just betrayed me. He had calculated me. And that was the moment I stopped being a wife trying to fix a marriage. I became something else entirely. The night everything finally exploded began with rain. Not the gentle kind that taps politely against the windows, but the heavy, relentless kind that turns the sky into a dull gray wall and makes the entire world feel tense and confined. Victor came home later than usual. It was close to 10 when I heard his car pull into the driveway. I was sitting at the kitchen island with the lights dimmed and the laptop closed in front of me. The account statements, the property records, the screenshots from his phone, everything I had discovered over the last 3 days were printed and stacked neatly beside my elbow. I had spent the entire afternoon deciding exactly how this conversation would go. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. And I definitely wasn't going to give him the chance to manipulate the narrative. The front door opened. Victor stepped inside, shaking rain from his jacket. "You're still up?" he said casually, hanging the coat on the rack. I couldn't sleep. He walked into the kitchen, loosening his tie, his expression relaxed in that familiar way that once made me feel safe. "You should have gone to bed," he said. "Long day tomorrow." Then he noticed the papers, and something in his posture tightened. "What's all this?" I watched him carefully. "Sit down, Victor." He frowned slightly. "Jackie, if this is about—" "Sit." There was something in my voice that made him obey. He lowered himself into the chair across from me, confusion slowly turning into unease. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The rain battered the windows. Thunder rumbled somewhere in the distance. Then I slid the first sheet across the island. The 529 account statement. His eyes flicked down. The color drained from his face. "You've been withdrawing money from Emily's college fund," I said quietly. Victor didn't answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the page, like the numbers might rearrange themselves if he stared hard enough. "Jackie, $60,000, I continued. "Over 6 months. He rubbed the back of his neck, already preparing the tone he always used when explaining things to people he thought were less informed. "It's not what you think." I almost laughed. "Then please," I said softly, "explain what I think." Victor inhaled slowly. That money wasn't being used yet. My hands tightened slightly around the edge of the island. "She still has 2 years before tuition payments start." I moved it temporarily. "Temporarily where?" He hesitated. That hesitation was everything. Finally, he said, "Into an investment opportunity." "Which one?" "Jackie." "No," I said firmly. "You're going to answer the question." Another long pause. Then I slid the second document toward him. The property record, Eric Shaw's downtown condominium. Victor's name listed as co-signer, beside Vanessa Shaw. His eyes widened. For a second, he looked genuinely stunned. Where did you get this? That's not the important question. I leaned forward slightly. The important question is why my husband used our daughter's education fund to help his girlfriend buy a luxury condo. Victor's entire body went still. Jackie, don't, I said sharply. I reached into my pocket and placed the burner phone on the counter. The screen lit up. A new message arrived at that exact moment. Vanessa, tomorrow night is still on, right? Victor stared at the phone like it had turned into a snake. Silence filled the kitchen. Thick, heavy, almost unbearable. Finally, he whispered, "You went through my phone." I read the messages. I corrected calmly. Another crack of thunder rolled across the sky. Victor pushed his chair back slightly, running a hand through his hair. This isn't how it looks. I felt something inside me snap quietly. Oh? He stood up, pacing a few steps, like a man assembling an argument. Vanessa and I have been working on a real estate project. The condo was a strategic purchase. With my daughter's money, it wasn't stolen. You signed her account withdrawals without telling me. It was an investment into your mistress. His jaw tightened. She's not my mistress. I picked up the phone and scrolled through the messages. Then I read one aloud. Once the condo flips, we'll triple the capital. Jackie will never notice. That account is just dead capital sitting there. The words hung in the air. Victor's expression shifted, not to guilt, to irritation. You weren't supposed to see that. For a moment, I just stared at him. Then I whispered, "Dead capital?" He exhaled impatiently. "Jackie, you're being emotional." Emotional? "Yes," he said, spreading his hands like he was explaining something obvious. "You don't understand how these deals work. Money sitting in a savings account is wasted potential. That was Emily's college fund. She's 19, Jackie. We had time." "Time for what? For you to gamble it on an affair?" Victor's voice hardened. "It wasn't an affair." I held up the phone again. "Can't wait to celebrate our new place tomorrow night." His silence was answer enough. For the first time in 20 years of marriage, I felt something colder than anger. Clarity. "You stole from your daughter," I said quietly, "to impress another woman." Victor scoffed. "Don't be dramatic." That sentence sealed everything. I stood slowly. For years, I had tried to preserve our marriage, but standing there in the kitchen, listening to the rain hammer against the windows, I realized something simple and devastating. There was nothing left to preserve. "You know what the worst part is?" I said softly. Victor frowned. "What?" "You still think you're the smartest person in the room." I stepped closer. "And you still think I'm the wife who will forgive you." He opened his mouth. But before he could speak, I slid one final document across the counter. The legal separation filing. His eyes widened. "Jackie, there is no we anymore." Outside, lightning split the sky. Inside the kitchen, the last piece of our marriage fell apart in absolute silence. For a long moment after I slid the legal separation papers across the counter, Victor didn't move. He simply stared. The way people stare at something that refuses to fit inside the story they've been telling themselves. "Jackie," he said slowly, like the word itself might calm the situation. "You're overreacting." I almost smiled. 20 years of marriage teaches you a lot about the person sitting across from you. You learn the tone they use when they're sincere, the tone they use when they're frightened, and the tone they use when they're about to start manipulating the situation. This was the last one. "Overreacting," I repeated quietly. Victor ran a hand through his hair, pacing a few steps across the kitchen, like a man trying to gather control of a meeting that had slipped away from him. "Look," he said, "yes, I moved the money, but the investment is solid. The condo value is already rising. In 6 months, we'll make the money back and then some." "We?" He stopped pacing. "You keep using that word," I said calmly, "like we're still partners in whatever scheme you've built." Victor's jaw tightened. "You're my wife." "I was your wife," I corrected. The distinction landed between us like a stone dropped into water. For a moment, his confidence cracked, and I saw the flash of something more honest, fear. But it disappeared almost immediately. "You can't just file for separation over a misunderstanding," he said. "That's not how marriage works." "No," I said softly. Marriage works when two people respect each other enough not to steal from their child. Victor slammed his hand lightly against the counter. I didn't steal it. You withdrew it without permission. I was going to replace it. With what money? I asked. He opened his mouth, closed it again. I watched him carefully. For the first time in our entire relationship, he didn't have a quick answer ready. Eric's real estate network is expanding, he said finally. There are investors coming in next quarter. Once the property appreciates... Eric, I interrupted. Victor froze. You say his name like he's the solution to everything. He sighed heavily. You don't understand how business works. The arrogance in his voice was so familiar, it almost felt comforting. For years, that tone had made me doubt myself, made me question my instincts, made me feel like I was being unreasonable whenever something didn't sit right in my chest. But something had changed tonight. You're right, I said. Victor looked surprised. I don't understand how business works. Then I tapped the stack of documents beside me. But I do understand math. He glanced down reluctantly. The next sheet showed the property purchase. Eric Shaw's condominium. $680,000. Down payment partially funded through a short-term capital transfer. The source account number printed clearly on the page. Emily's college fund. Victor's voice dropped. Where did you get these? Public property records. And the rest? Your phone. His shoulders sagged slightly. Jackie. The tone changed again. Now it was softer. More cautious. He stepped closer to the island. I know this looks bad, he said quietly. But this is temporary. I swear to you. I studied his face carefully. The same face I had woken up beside for 2 decades. The same eyes that had watched Emily take her first steps. The same mouth that had promised, once upon a time, that he would never lie to me. And yet somehow the man standing in front of me felt like a stranger wearing my husband's skin. Did you love her? I asked. Victor blinked. What? Vanessa. He hesitated. Jackie. Just answer the question. His gaze drifted toward the window. It's complicated. I nodded slowly. That's what I thought. Nothing about this was supposed to hurt you. The sentence hung in the air. I felt a bitter laugh rising in my chest. You stole from our daughter, I said quietly. I was going to replace the money. You humiliated our marriage. That was never the intention. And you still think the problem here is that I'm upset. Victor rubbed his face with both hands. You're blowing this up into something bigger than it needs to be. Bigger. Yes, he said, frustration creeping into his voice again. You're acting like everything is over because of one financial mistake. I leaned forward slightly. One mistake. You're emotional right now. The words landed like a match dropped into gasoline. For a second, I just stared at him. Then I asked the question that had been sitting in my chest since the moment I read those messages. When you wrote that Emily's college fund was dead capital, I said quietly, did you believe that? Victor froze. His silence answered everything. You did, I whispered. It was a business expression. You were talking about your daughter. It's not like that. You called her future dead capital. Victor's voice sharpened. Jackie, enough. No, I said firmly. For 20 years, I trusted you. He looked away. I believed every explanation. He shifted uncomfortably. I defended you when people said you were too ambitious, too arrogant, too focused on money. His shoulders stiffened. But the truth is, I said slowly, you didn't just gamble with our daughter's future. I paused. You gambled with me. Victor finally looked back at me, and you lost. The silence that followed felt different, not tense, final. Outside, the rain had slowed to a dull, steady rhythm. Victor glanced at the separation papers again. You're serious about this? Yes. You're willing to throw away 20 years? I'm not throwing it away, I said quietly. You already did that when you decided your family was expendable. He stared at me for a long time. Then his voice dropped to something colder. You're making a mistake, Jackie. Am I? Yes. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. You don't know how ugly this can get. I held his gaze without blinking. For the first time that night, Victor looked uncertain again, because the woman sitting across from him wasn't the same wife he had grown used to controlling. I know exactly how ugly it already is, I said calmly, and I'm done pretending otherwise. The moment stretched between us. Then Victor stepped back, slowly. The storm outside had begun to fade, but inside our house, the real damage had only just begun. The morning after our confrontation felt strangely quiet, not peaceful, just hollow. Victor had slept on the couch, though I doubted he had actually slept. When I came downstairs at 6, he was already dressed, standing in the kitchen with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. For a moment, we simply looked at each other. 20 years of shared routines suddenly reduced to two strangers standing in the same room. I have a meeting early, he said stiffly. I assumed. His eyes drifted toward the folder of documents still sitting on the kitchen table. You really filed those papers? Yes. He picked up his coffee, took a sip, then set it back down. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Harder than stealing from your daughter? Victor exhaled sharply. I told you I'm fixing that. How? Eric has investors. I felt a familiar coldness settle into my chest. Your solution is still Eric. You're being stubborn. And you're being reckless. Victor grabbed his keys. Jackie, you're letting emotions destroy something we can repair. Repair requires honesty. I'm being honest. No, I said quietly. You're being strategic. For a second, his expression hardened. Then he turned toward the door. This conversation isn't over. It is for me. He left without another word. The door closed. And the house felt different. Lighter. But also lonelier. I stood there for several minutes, staring at the empty driveway, before finally pulling out my phone. The first call I made was to a lawyer, not a dramatic, television-style divorce attorney who thrived on courtroom theatrics. I called Susan Whitaker. Susan was the kind of lawyer who spoke calmly and documented everything. She had handled several complicated financial separations in town, and had a reputation for one thing above all else: precision. When she answered, I got straight to the point. Susan, I need to discuss legal separation and financial asset protection. There was a brief pause on the line. Jackie Landry? Yes. Well, she said gently, that doesn't sound like a casual conversation. When can you come in? Today. 2 hours later, I was sitting across from her in a quiet office that smelled faintly of old paper and coffee. Susan listened without interrupting as I explained everything. The withdrawals, the condo, the affair, the burner phone, the messages about dead capital. When I finished, she folded her hands thoughtfully. Do you have documentation? I slid the folder across her desk. She opened it. Her eyebrows rose slightly as she flipped through the pages. You've done quite a bit of homework. I'm an engineer. That explains the spreadsheets. She continued reading silently for several minutes. Finally, she looked up. Jackie, this is serious. I assumed as much. The unauthorized use of a 529 education fund for non-educational purposes carries tax penalties, potential fraud implications, and mandatory reporting requirements. I know. You know? I spent the night researching. Susan leaned back in her chair. Then you also know what happens when institutions start investigating. Yes. They investigate everything. I nodded slowly. That's exactly what I want. She studied me carefully. Are you sure about this? Once the process starts, it won't just affect your husband. It could damage your family's reputation, your daughter's emotional stability, and potentially your financial standing as well. My daughter already thinks her tuition money disappeared. Susan's expression softened. I'm sorry. So am I said quietly. But pretending this didn't happen would hurt her more. Susan closed the folder. All right, she said firmly. Then we proceed carefully. For the next hour, we went through every financial account Victor and I shared. Joint savings, investment portfolios, mortgage documentation, retirement funds. Susan made several quick notes. You should transfer half of the liquid assets into a protected account immediately, she advised. Can I do that legally? Yes. During separation proceedings, securing marital assets is standard practice. And the education fund? That situation will trigger reporting once the withdrawals are reviewed. I nodded. That's already in motion. She blinked. You've already filed a report? With the college financial office. Susan exhaled slowly. You move fast. I've had 3 days to think. She gave a small, approving nod. Good. When I left her office, the sky had finally cleared. The storm clouds had drifted away, leaving the town washed clean and strangely bright. But the escalation didn't stop there, because by the time I returned home that afternoon, Victor's family already knew. His mother called first. "Jackie, what is this nonsense Victor is telling me?" I closed my eyes briefly. "What exactly did he say?" "That you're threatening divorce over a misunderstanding." "Did he mention the missing college money?" A pause. "No." "Did he mention Vanessa Shaw?" Another pause. "No." Of course he hadn't. "He also didn't mention that he used our daughter's education fund to help his girlfriend buy a condominium," I said calmly. The silence on the other end lasted nearly 10 seconds. "That can't be true." "It is. That doesn't sound like Victor. Then perhaps you don't know him as well as you thought." Her voice sharpened. "Marriage requires forgiveness. Marriage requires trust. You're embarrassing the family." The sentence landed exactly the way she intended. For years, Victor's mother had measured worth in reputation, appearances, social standing. I felt something inside me finally snap free. "Your son embarrassed the family," I said quietly. "Not me." She hung up. The next call came from Victor himself. His voice was tight with anger. "Did you talk to my mother?" "Yes." "You told her about Vanessa?" "You should have done that yourself." "Jackie, this is getting out of control." "It already was. You're turning my family against me." "No," I said calmly. "Your choices did that." His breathing grew heavier. "You need to stop escalating this." "I'm not escalating anything." "Then why did the college contact me about an investigation?" "Because the system was already moving." "I told you," I said quietly. "Actions have consequences." Victor's voice dropped into something colder. "You think you're punishing me. I'm protecting Emily. You're destroying everything." "No," I said. "You already destroyed it." There was a long silence. Then Victor said something that made the air in my lungs turn to ice. "You're going to regret this." And the line went dead. I stared at the phone for several seconds before setting it down, because deep down, I knew something important. The situation was no longer just about betrayal. Now it was about damage control, Victor's reputation, Eric's business, the missing money, and the investigation that had already begun to ripple outward. The truth had started moving. And once truth begins to move, it rarely stops quietly. 2 days later, Emily called me crying. Not the quiet, controlled kind of crying she had learned to hide as a teenager. This was the kind that comes in broken breaths, the kind that makes every word sound like it's being dragged through glass. "Mom, something's wrong." I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. "What happened, sweetheart?" I got an email from the bursar's office. My chest tightened. "They said my tuition balance doesn't match the payment schedule." I closed my eyes for a moment. "What exactly did they say?" "That the account doesn't have enough to cover next semester." Her voice cracked. "Mom, I thought the college fund was supposed to be secure." Hearing the fear in her voice hurt more than anything Victor had done. "Emily," I said gently, "listen to me. Everything is going to be okay." "But how?" she whispered. "Dad always said the account had more than enough." The lie sat heavy on my tongue. "Your father stole it." I couldn't say that. Not yet. Instead, I took a slow breath. There were some unauthorized withdrawals. Unauthorized? Yes. "You mean someone stole it?" "Something like that." There was a long pause. "Mom, am I going to have to leave school?" The question broke something inside me. "No," I said firmly. "You are not leaving school." "But if the money's gone," "It won't be gone for long." "How can you be sure?" Because I was already setting everything in motion. Because Victor had underestimated the one thing he never bothered to understand about me: persistence. "I promise you," I said quietly. "I'm fixing it." She sniffed softly. "I'm scared." "I know. I worked so hard to get here, and you're not losing it." Dad said investments sometimes fluctuate. The mention of Victor made my chest tighten. "Yes," I said slowly. "They do." "Is he fixing it?" I hesitated. "He's involved." That was the closest thing to truth I could offer without destroying her trust in her father all at once. When the call ended, I sat in the silent kitchen for a long time. Emily's voice kept replaying in my head. Am I going to have to leave school? The thought made my stomach twist. Victor had called the money dead capital. But for Emily, it wasn't abstract. It was her future, her independence, her belief that her parents had built something solid enough for her to stand on. And for the first time since the confrontation in the kitchen, I felt the weight of everything crash down on me at once. 20 years of marriage, 2 decades of memories that suddenly felt contaminated. Family dinners, birthdays, vacations. All of it now tangled with the knowledge that the man I had trusted most in the world had quietly dismantled the security we promised our daughter. I stood up and walked to the living room. Victor's favorite chair still faced the television like nothing had changed. His coffee mug sat in the sink. His jacket hung on the back of a chair. The house looked exactly the same, but it didn't feel like my home anymore. It felt like the aftermath of something broken. For a moment, exhaustion washed over me so heavily that I sank onto the couch and covered my face with both hands. Maybe Victor was right about one thing. Maybe this was too big, too messy, too destructive. The investigation, the divorce, the financial fallout, Emily caught in the middle. Maybe fighting would only make everything worse. Maybe the smarter path was the one so many women choose. Quiet compromise, private forgiveness, pretending the betrayal wasn't as devastating as it actually was. I sat there in silence, letting that possibility settle into my mind. And for a few dangerous minutes, I almost believed it. But then another memory surfaced. Emily, at 10 years old, sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. She had looked up and asked me a question that seemed simple at the time. "Mom, how do you know if someone is a good person?" I had thought about it for a moment before answering. "A good person," I told her, "is someone who protects the people they love, even when it's difficult." That answer had felt right then. And it still did. I lowered my hands slowly. The exhaustion was still there, the sadness too. But underneath both of them, something stronger was beginning to take shape. Resolve. Victor had made a choice. He had chosen greed. Vanessa had chosen convenience. Eric Shaw had chosen opportunity. Now I had to choose something too. I stood up and walked back to the kitchen. My laptop was still open on the counter. The investigation files sat beside it. Bank records, property documents, email confirmations. The evidence wasn't emotional. It was factual, precise, and very difficult to ignore. I stared at the stack of papers for a long time. Then I whispered something out loud for the first time since this nightmare began. "I'm not letting them take her future." The house remained silent. But the moment felt like standing at the bottom of a long climb, because I finally understood something Victor never had. Strength doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like a tired woman standing alone in her kitchen, deciding that she refuses to lose. And once that decision is made, everything changes. The turning point didn't arrive with shouting or confrontation. It arrived with a phone call. 3 days after Emily's panicked conversation, I was sitting at my desk reviewing financial documents when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the caller ID showed it was from downtown Bracton. I answered cautiously. "This is Jackie Landry." A man cleared his throat on the other end. "Mrs. Landry, my name is Marcus Bennett. I'm a partner at Shaw and Bennett Realty, Eric Shaw's company." My posture straightened instantly. "How can I help you, Mr. Bennett?" There was a pause before he spoke again, and I could almost hear him choosing his words carefully. "I'm calling because something unusual has come to our attention regarding a recent property purchase." "The downtown condominium?" I asked calmly. Another pause. "Yes, I'm familiar with it. That's actually why I'm calling." His voice dropped slightly. "Mrs. Landry, I want to be transparent. Our firm has been reviewing several transactions connected to Eric Shaw over the last year. Some irregularities have surfaced." Irregularities. Corporate language for something is very wrong. "I see," I said. "And your husband's name appears in several of the financial documents connected to that purchase." "I know." He hesitated. "You sound remarkably calm about that." "I've had time to process." Marcus exhaled quietly. "Well, that's good, because the situation is developing quickly." "How quickly?" The state financial compliance office contacted us yesterday. The investigation had already spread beyond the college. That was fast. Yes, he said dryly. Those offices tend to move quickly when education funds are involved. I felt a small flicker of grim satisfaction. Mr. Bennett, I said carefully, why exactly are you calling me? Because business partners don't usually contact spouses, unless something has gone catastrophically wrong. Marcus answered the question directly. Because Eric didn't disclose where the initial capital for that condo came from. I leaned back in my chair. And now you know. Yes. Another pause. And frankly, Mrs. Landry, I'm concerned. Concerned about what? About liability. That word explained everything. Let me guess, I said quietly. You're worried the investigation will connect your firm to the misuse of educational funds? Yes. And you want distance? Yes. I almost smiled. Marcus continued speaking. When we reviewed the transaction records, we also discovered something Eric didn't mention. What's that? The property isn't profitable. That surprised me. What do you mean? The condo was purchased above market value. Eric was planning to flip it quickly to recover the capital. And there were no buyers. A slow realization spread through my chest. So the investment he promised my husband was already failing. Marcus didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, it was extremely risky. Translation? Reckless. Thank you for telling me, I said. I'm telling you, Marcus replied, because we're dissolving the partnership. That landed like a hammer. Dissolving? Yes. Shaw and Bennett Realty will no longer operate under Eric Shaw's management. What happens to his assets? They'll likely be liquidated to cover investor exposure, which meant one very important thing. The condo. The condo bought with Emily's stolen money would be sold, Marcus continued. I also want you to understand something, Mrs. Landry. I'm listening. I didn't call you out of kindness. I assumed that. I called because if investigators ask, I intend to cooperate fully. Meaning you'll provide every document connected to Eric's transactions? Yes. That includes the condo purchase? Yes. And the source of the funds? Yes. Silence settled between us for a moment. Then Marcus said quietly, your husband made a very bad decision. I stared at the window, watching sunlight move across the driveway. He's made several. Marcus exhaled again. Mrs. Landry, for what it's worth, I'm sorry your family got dragged into this. I believed him. But sympathy wasn't what mattered. Accountability was. Thank you for telling me, I said. After the call ended, I sat very still for several minutes. Not because I was overwhelmed, because I was finally seeing the full shape of what Victor had created. The affair. The stolen college money. The risky investment. The collapsing business. The investigation spreading outward like cracks through glass. Victor had believed he was playing a clever financial game, but the truth was simpler. He had built a house of cards, and now the wind had started blowing. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. For the first time since the nightmare began, I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt clear. Because Marcus's call had confirmed something important. I wasn't the only one watching this situation unfold anymore. The state, the college, Eric's business partners. Everyone was starting to look at the same evidence. And when enough people start looking at the truth, it becomes impossible to hide. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text message. Victor, we need to talk. I stared at the message for several seconds. Then I typed back a simple reply. Yes, we do. But the conversation we were about to have would be very different from the ones he was used to. Because Victor still thought this situation could be negotiated, compromised, managed. What he didn't realize yet was that the turning point had already passed. And from here forward, the truth was going to move faster than he could run. Victor insisted we meet somewhere public. That alone told me how nervous he had become. For 20 years, he had always preferred private conversations, controlled environments where he could steer the narrative, lower his voice, and convince me that my instincts were overreactions. But now the situation had grown larger than our living room, larger than our marriage. He chose the Riverside Diner. It was a place halfway between respectable and ordinary. The kind of restaurant where truck drivers drank coffee beside real estate agents, and nobody paid much attention to private conversations. When I arrived, Victor was already there, and he wasn't alone. Vanessa Shaw sat across from him in the booth. For a moment, I simply stood near the entrance and watched them. Vanessa looked exactly the way I imagined she would. Beautiful in the polished, deliberate way that comes from expensive haircuts and carefully chosen clothes. Her posture was elegant, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed something underneath. Fear. Victor looked worse. His usually neat appearance had started to slip. His shirt was wrinkled. Dark circles framed his eyes. The confident man who used to walk into rooms like he owned them now looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. They both noticed me at the same time. Victor stood quickly. Jackie. Vanessa didn't stand. She simply watched me with guarded curiosity. I slid into the booth opposite them. Good afternoon. Victor cleared his throat. Thank you for coming. You said it was important. It is. Vanessa spoke for the first time. Mrs. Landry, I'm glad you agreed to meet. Her voice was smooth, controlled, but I could hear the tightness underneath it. I folded my hands calmly on the table. You should know something before we start. Victor frowned. What? I spoke to Marcus Bennett this morning. Both of their reactions were immediate. Victor's face went pale. Vanessa's eyes widened. You did what? Victor asked. He called me. Why would he call you? Because the investigation has already reached your company. Vanessa inhaled sharply. Victor leaned forward, lowering his voice. Jackie, you shouldn't be talking to people about this. It's a little late for that. This is private. No, I said calmly. This became public the moment you involved stolen education funds. Vanessa finally spoke again. You filed the report. I looked directly at her. Yes. Her jaw tightened. That was unnecessary. Stealing from a child's college fund tends to trigger mandatory reporting. Victor rubbed his temples. You've turned this into a disaster. No, I said quietly. You did. Vanessa leaned forward now. We can fix this. How? She glanced at Victor before answering. The condo can be sold. Victor shot her a quick look. That wasn't the plan. Plans change, she said coldly. I watched the exchange with quiet interest. So the investment isn't working. Victor shifted uncomfortably. It's temporary. Vanessa's voice sharpened. Stop pretending. Silence fell across the booth. Victor looked between the two of us like a man realizing the ground beneath him was collapsing. I spoke gently. Marcus told me the property is already losing value. Victor stared at me. You talked to him for that long? Yes. Vanessa exhaled slowly. This is exactly what we were trying to avoid. Which part? I asked. The investigation or the divorce? She didn't answer. Victor leaned closer. Jackie, listen to me. I am. We can recover the money. With what assets? The condo, which is already under scrutiny. Victor's voice rose slightly. You're not helping. I'm not here to help you. Vanessa watched us carefully. Then she said something that changed the entire tone of the conversation. Eric left town yesterday. Victor froze. What? She didn't look at him. He packed everything into a rental truck and drove out early this morning. Victor stared at her. You're lying. I wish I were. You said he was meeting investors. He was. And? They backed out. Victor's breathing grew heavier. So he ran? Yes. The word hung in the air like a verdict. Vanessa looked suddenly smaller, less polished, less confident. He said things would calm down after a few weeks, she continued quietly. But once the investigation started, he panicked. Victor slammed his hand lightly on the table. That coward. I watched the two of them carefully. So Eric disappears, I said calmly. And you're left holding the consequences. Vanessa's eyes flashed. You're enjoying this. No, I said. I'm observing it. Victor looked like he might explode. You think this is justice? I think this is gravity. What does that mean? It means when someone builds their life on lies, eventually the structure collapses. Vanessa whispered. This didn't have to happen. I met her gaze. Yes, it did. Victor leaned forward again. What do you want, Jackie? The question sounded desperate now. Not arrogant, not confident. Just desperate. I thought about Emily's voice on the phone. Her fear, her uncertainty, her belief that the adults in her life would protect her future. Then I answered, I want the truth documented. Victor frowned. What? The investigation will handle the finances. And the divorce? That's already filed. Vanessa looked down at the table. So there's nothing we can say? No. Victor's voice cracked slightly. You're really going through with this? Yes. He stared at me for several seconds. Then he said something that sounded almost defeated. You're destroying everything. I shook my head slowly. No. You already destroyed it. Outside the diner window, traffic moved quietly through the afternoon sunlight. Life continued as usual. But inside that small booth, the consequences of Victor's decisions had finally become unavoidable. And for the first time since the truth came out, I could see something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Real fear. 3 months later, the house was quiet again. Not the heavy, suffocating silence that followed the night Victor left. A different kind of quiet. The kind that comes after a storm has passed and everything damaged has finally been cleared away. The divorce had been finalized 2 weeks earlier. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting courtroom battles, no theatrical accusations. Just paperwork, signatures, and the slow, methodical dismantling of a life that had once seemed permanent. The investigation had done most of the work. The misuse of Emily's education fund triggered financial penalties and mandatory tax recovery. Eric Shaw's failed real estate deals unraveled quickly once investors started looking closer. Without his partner's support, the business collapsed within weeks. The condo was sold during the liquidation process. Most of the money recovered from that sale went directly back into Emily's education account. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to restore the future Victor had gambled away. Vanessa disappeared from Bracton not long after Eric did. The last I heard, she moved to another state to stay with relatives. Small towns have long memories, and her reputation had evaporated faster than she expected. Victor stayed in town for a while. I saw him once, accidentally, at the grocery store. He looked older. Not dramatically. Just diminished. The kind of change that happens when someone realizes the life they built depended entirely on illusions that no longer exist. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. The house we shared for 20 years was sold as part of the settlement. I moved into a smaller place on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, but comfortable and quiet. For the first time in decades, every object in my home belonged only to me. Emily came home one weekend after the semester started again. She walked into the new kitchen, looked around thoughtfully, and smiled. I like it, she said. You're just being polite. No, she laughed. It feels peaceful. We sat together at the small dining table drinking coffee. For a while, neither of us talked about the past. Eventually, she asked softly, Are you okay, Mom? I thought about the question carefully. I'm getting there, she nodded. I know everything now. I met her eyes. Victor had tried to keep his version of the story alive, but investigations have a way of making truth impossible to hide. I'm sorry you had to learn about it this way, I said. Emily shook her head. I'm not. You're not? No. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Because you fixed it. I smiled slightly. We fixed it. She studied my face for a moment before asking another question. Do you hate Dad? The question surprised me. I thought about it honestly. No, I said. Why not? Because hatred takes energy. I'd rather spend building something better. Emily nodded slowly. That makes sense. For a moment, we sat quietly again. Then she asked the question that mattered most. Do you regret fighting back? I looked out the window at the quiet street beyond the yard. No. Why? Because I had spent 20 years believing peace meant avoiding conflict. But sometimes peace requires confrontation. Sometimes protecting the people you love means refusing to stay silent when something wrong is happening right in front of you. I don't regret it, I said gently. Because your future matters more than anyone's pride. Emily smiled. Good. Later that evening, after she left to meet friends, I sat alone on the small back porch of my new house. The air was warm, the sky was clear, and for the first time in a long time, my mind felt calm. Victor had called our daughter's college fund dead capital, money sitting idle, money not being used to its full potential. But he had misunderstood something important. Not everything valuable exists to generate profit. Some things exist to create stability, opportunity, trust, And when someone betrays those things, the real loss isn't financial, it's personal. But the truth I learned from everything that happened was simple. Sometimes the strongest investment you can make isn't in money or property or reputation. Sometimes the strongest investment is protecting the people who trust you most. And when that trust is threatened, you fight for it, no matter the cost.